Captain Jake Morrison had seen many terrible things in his 15 years with the Terran Defense Corps. He had fought in battles across 3 star systems and walked through the ruins of destroyed colonies. But nothing could prepare him for what he found beneath the Krillian mining facility on planet Epsilon 7. His team had come to investigate reports of illegal mining operations. The intel said nothing about the massive underground chamber they now stood in. Jake looked around the enormous cavern and felt his stomach turn. The room was huge, carved from solid rock and reinforced with strange alien metal that glowed under the harsh industrial lights. Thick chains stretched from the walls to the center of the chamber. Each chain was thicker than a man's body and hummed with purple energy. And in the middle of it all was a creature that should not exist. Lieutenant Kate Fletcher stood beside Jake, her weapon lowering in shock. "Is that what I think it is?" she whispered. Jake nodded slowly. The creature before them was at least 60 feet long from nose to tail. Its body was covered in scales that shifted between deep red and black. 4 powerful legs ended in claws that could tear through steel like paper. Wings that should have been magnificent were folded tight against its body, bound by the glowing chains. A metal muzzle covered its jaws. But what struck Jake most were the eyes. They held intelligence that made his blood run cold. A Varathian drake. Everyone thought these creatures were extinct. The Krillian Empire had hunted them down 300 years ago. They were supposed to be gone forever. But here one was, chained and imprisoned in the darkness. Corporal Danny Wright checked his scanner. "Boss, the Krillians have been using it. These readings show they've been draining something from the creature. Neural pathways are active. They're harvesting its psychic energy." Jake felt anger burning in his chest. The Krillians were known as slavers, but this was different. This was torture on a massive scale. Danny's scanner showed the process had been going on for years, maybe decades, maybe longer. "How long has it been here?" Kate asked. Danny's face went pale as he studied his readings. "The scanner shows trace elements in the rock. Based on decay rates and excavation patterns, this chamber is at least 200 years old. Maybe more. 200 years. Jake looked back at the drake and saw what he had missed before. The creature was covered in scars. Thousands of them crossed its hide. Some were old and faded. Others looked fresh. The scales around the chains were burned and damaged, showing where the energy fields had tortured it over time. The drake's eyes followed Jake as he moved closer. He could see something in them that made his heart hurt. Not the mindless rage he expected, not animal fury, but awareness, recognition. And beneath it all, a weariness so deep it seemed to radiate from the creature's very soul. "We need to call this in," Kate said. "Command will want to know." "No," Jake said firmly. "We don't have time. The Krillian guards will be back soon. When they find us here, they'll either kill it or move it somewhere we can't follow. We act now." "Are you crazy?" Danny protested. "That thing is a Varathian drake. If we release it, it'll tear us apart and probably destroy half the sector." Jake met the drake's gaze again. Those ancient eyes held him, and something passed between them. Not words exactly, but understanding. A question. Would this human help? Or would he walk away like so many others must have done over the centuries? "Look at it," Jake said quietly. "Really look at it. That's not a mindless beast. That's a prisoner, a slave. And I didn't join the Corps to walk away from something like that, no matter how dangerous it might be." He approached the control panel on the wall. His team watched nervously. Jake had spent enough time in enemy territory to recognize standard containment systems. His fingers moved across the interface, searching for the release sequence. "Captain, please think about this," Kate said, her voice tight with fear. "We don't know what will happen." "I know exactly what will happen if we leave it here," Jake replied. "And I won't have that on my conscience." He found the release sequence and paused. His hand hovered over the final command. The Drake watched him, those intelligent eyes never leaving his face. Jake took a deep breath and pressed the control. The chains fell away with a thunderous crash. The energy fields vanished in sparks of purple light. The muzzle split apart and hit the stone floor with a clang. For a long moment, nothing happened. The Drake remained still, as if it couldn't believe the bonds were gone. Then, slowly, it moved. The wings unfurled, revealing membranes that caught the light like stained glass. Deep reds and blacks swirled in patterns that seemed to shift and change. The Drake raised its head, stretching muscles that hadn't moved freely in who knew how long. The sound it made was somewhere between a roar and a sigh. Relief and rage mixed together. Jake's team raised their weapons, but he held up a hand. "Stand down." The Drake turned its full attention to Jake. It lowered its massive head until they were at eye level. Jake could feel the heat coming from its body. He could smell something like burning stone and ancient earth. Those eyes studied him with an intensity that felt like it was peeling back every layer of his being. Then the Drake did something unexpected. It bowed its head slightly, just enough to be clear, and made a low rumbling sound in its chest. The sound was almost like gratitude. "I'll be damned," Danny whispered. "It understands." "Of course it understands," Jake said, never breaking eye contact with the creature. "The question is, what happens now?" The answer came in the form of alarms blaring throughout the facility. The Krillians had discovered the breach. Within moments, they would flood this chamber with soldiers and heavy weapons. Jake's small team wouldn't stand a chance against them. The Drake's head snapped up, its nostrils flared as it caught the scent of approaching enemies. A growl built in its throat, deep and resonant, promising violence. For 200 years, it had been chained and tortured. Now it was free, and Jake could see in its eyes that it intended to make someone pay for those lost centuries. "We need to move," Kate urged. "Now." But Jake stood his ground as the Drake spread its wings fully. The span was so wide it nearly touched both walls of the massive chamber. The creature looked down at him one more time, and Jake could have sworn he saw something like respect in those ancient eyes. Then the doors burst open. Krillian soldiers poured into the chamber, weapons raised and ready, and all hell broke loose. The Drake moved with impossible speed for something so large. It launched itself at the first wave of soldiers with a roar that shook the walls. Fire erupted from its mouth, not ordinary flames but white-hot plasma that burned with such intensity the soldiers simply ceased to exist. Their armor melted before their bodies turned to ash. Jake grabbed his team and pulled them behind a cluster of support columns. The heat was overwhelming even from this distance. The air shimmered and distorted around them. The Drake was everywhere at once. It moved like a whirlwind of scales, claws, and fire. Its powerful legs propelled it forward while its tail lashed out, crushing equipment and soldiers alike. The wings beat with tremendous force, creating winds that sent debris flying across the chamber. More Krillians poured through the doors, but the Drake was unstoppable. It had been caged for 2 centuries, tortured every day of its captivity. Now it was free, and nothing would stop it from taking revenge. Jake noticed something important. For all its rage and destructive power, the Drake was being careful. Its attacks never came near the human team. When it breathed fire, it angled the flames away from their position. When its tail lashed out, it made sure they were clear. Even in the middle of its rampage, the creature remembered who had freed it. "We need to get out of here," Kate shouted over the noise. "That thing's gonna bring this whole place down." She was right. The Drake wasn't just attacking, it was destroying everything. Support beams buckled under its strikes. Walls cracked where its claws raked across them. The foundation of the entire facility was beginning to fail. Jake looked for an escape route and spotted a maintenance tunnel on the far side of the chamber. "There! Move!" His team ran, using the chaos as cover. The Krillians had brought in heavy weapons now, energy cannons that crackled with deadly force. But the Drake was too fast, too unpredictable. It took to the air despite the low ceiling, using every bit of vertical space, diving and striking like some ancient predator. They were halfway to the tunnel when a massive blast door began closing. It was designed to seal the chamber and trap the Drake inside. But it would also cut off their escape. The Drake saw the danger. Its head turned toward Jake's team, then to the closing door. For a split second, Jake saw calculation in those ancient eyes. Then the creature was moving faster than anything that size should move. It crossed the chamber in 3 powerful bounds and hit the blast door with the force of a meteor. The reinforced metal screamed in protest. The Drake's claws dug into the door's surface. Its muscles strained as it literally held the multi-ton barrier open through pure physical strength. "Go!" Jake shouted. His team sprinted for the gap, diving through as energy blasts scorched the ground behind them. As Kate rolled through the opening, Jake paused and looked back. The Drake was still holding the door, its body blocking the Krillians from following. Those ancient eyes met his again, and Jake understood. The creature was giving them time to escape. "Come with us!" Jake called out, though he knew it was probably pointless. The Drake's response was to release the door and turn back to face the Krillian forces. The message was clear. Go while you can. Jake hesitated one more second, then nodded in respect and ran. The tunnel walls shook with each impact from the battle behind them. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling as Jake's team raced toward the surface. The sounds of destruction echoed through the passage, following them like an angry ghost. They burst out into the harsh daylight of Epsilon 7, coughing and gasping for breath. The mining facility was built into the side of a mountain, and from where they stood, they could see the entire structure beginning to collapse. Explosions blossomed from within as critical systems failed and power cores went critical. "We need to reach the extraction point," Kate said, already moving. "The whole mountain's coming down." They ran hard, their combat armor helping them cover ground quickly. Behind them, the facility was tearing itself apart. The ground shook with continuous tremors. Then, just as they reached the ridge where their transport ship waited, a section of the mountain exploded outward. The Drake burst from the rock and stone like an ancient god. Its wings spread wide as it climbed into the sky for the first time in 2 centuries. It went higher and higher, its scales catching the sunlight and turning its body into a living banner of red and black. The sound it made wasn't a roar, but a cry of triumph and freedom combined. Jake's team stopped to watch. They couldn't help it. The sight was too powerful to ignore. The Drake circled the collapsing facility once, twice, and on the 3rd pass, it dove straight down. It crashed through what remained of the structure with such force that the entire mountain shook. Secondary explosions rippled outward in waves of fire and smoke. When the Drake emerged again, the facility was completely destroyed. Nothing remained but burning rubble and twisted metal. "That's one serious grudge," Danny said in awe. The Drake gained altitude again, circling higher and higher until it was just a dark speck against the blue-green sky. For a moment, Jake thought it would simply fly away and disappear into the wilderness. Part of him hoped it would. The creature deserved its freedom after so long in chains. But then, the speck grew larger. The Drake was coming back, descending in a controlled spiral toward their position. Jake's team raised their weapons instinctively, but he signaled them to stand down. The Drake landed 100 meters away. The impact sent tremors through the ground. It folded its wings and approached slowly, deliberately. The rage from its rampage was gone, replaced by something else, curiosity perhaps, or evaluation. "What's it doing?" Kate whispered, her finger near her weapon's trigger. "I don't know," Jake admitted. but I don't think it means us harm." The drake stopped about 20 meters away. This close, the sheer size of the creature was overwhelming. Each of its claws was as long as Jake's forearm. Its teeth could bite him in half without effort. But it was the eyes that held him. Those eyes that had seen centuries pass, that held intelligence matching or exceeding his own. The drake lowered its head to Jake's level, just as it had done in the chamber. Then it did something that made Jake's heart skip. It extended one massive claw and gently touched the ground directly in front of him. Not threatening, not aggressive, a gesture, deliberate and meaningful. "I think it's trying to communicate," Danny said slowly. Jake took a cautious step forward, then another, until he was close enough to reach out. He hesitated, then placed his hand against the drake's snout. The scales were warm, almost hot. He could feel power thrumming through the creature's body like electricity. The drake's eyes closed for a moment, as if enjoying the gentle contact after so long with only pain. When they opened again, Jake saw something new. Decision. The drake pulled back slightly and looked toward the sky, then back at Jake. The meaning was clear. It could leave, go anywhere, reclaim its freedom. But then it looked at Jake again and made that same low, rumbling sound, the one that sounded like gratitude. "I think it's saying thank you," Kate said softly. "I think it's saying more than that," Jake replied. The sound of engines approaching broke the moment. Jake's radio crackled to life. Commander Lisa Grant's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Morrison, this is Command. We're tracking a massive heat signature at your location. What's your status?" Jake looked at the drake, then at his team, then at the approaching shuttles. Those shuttles would be filled with soldiers and weapons. People who would see the drake as a threat to eliminate rather than a being that deserved freedom. In that moment, Jake made another important decision. The first had been freeing the drake. This second one would change everything. "Commander," he said into his radio, never taking his eyes off the drake. "You're not going to believe this, but I need you to authorize something unusual, and I need you to trust me." The emergency council meeting at Terran Defense Corps headquarters was chaos. The room was packed with high-ranking officers, government officials, and scientists. Everyone seemed to be speaking at once. Jake stood at the center of the storm with Commander Grant at his side, defending what many called the most reckless decision in recent military history. On the massive view screen behind them, live footage showed the drake resting in a specially prepared zone on the edge of the base. The creature was calm, almost peaceful, but its presence had sent shockwaves through every level of government. "You freed a Vorathian drake," Admiral Paul Henderson said, his voice tight with anger. "One of the most dangerous predators in known space. Without authorization, without backup, without any thought for the consequences." "With respect, Admiral, I made a field decision," Jake replied calmly. The creature was being tortured by the Krillians. It was a clear violation of basic rights. "It's not a person, Captain," Dr. Helen Zhao interrupted. "It's an animal, a dangerous animal. You don't free a caged tiger and expect it to thank you." "Then explain the footage," Commander Grant said, nodding to a technician. The view screen changed to show recordings from Jake's helmet camera. The moment in the chamber when the drake had bowed its head. The moment when it held the blast door open to let the humans escape. The room fell silent as they watched. When the footage ended, Dr. Zhao looked troubled. "That could be instinctive behavior?" "It's not," said a new voice. Dr. Marcus Webb stepped forward. He was older, his hair white and his face lined with age, but his eyes were sharp. "If you'll permit me, Admiral." Admiral Henderson nodded, and Dr. Webb activated his datapad. New images appeared on the screen showing brain scans and neural pathways. "Vorathian drakes are not simple animals," Dr. Webb began. "Before the Krillians nearly drove them extinct, there were documented cases suggesting high intelligence. The problem is that drakes don't communicate like we do. They don't have verbal language. Their brain structure is completely different from ours. He pulled up another image showing complex patterns. However, what Captain Morrison has done is give us the first chance in 200 years to study drake behavior with a non-hostile species, and the results are remarkable. The neural activity suggests intelligence on par with, or possibly exceeding, human intelligence. That's just speculation, someone called from the back. It was speculation, Dr. Webb agreed, until 2 hours ago. He pulled up new footage from the containment zone. It showed Jake's second visit to the drake. In the video, Jake approached carefully, and the drake responded by using one of its claws to draw in the dirt. The room leaned forward as they watched the drake create symbols. Not random scratches, but geometric shapes arranged in specific patterns. And Jake began to respond, drawing his own shapes in return. "What are we looking at?" Admiral Henderson demanded. "Communication," Dr. Webb said simply. "The drake is establishing a symbolic language. It's teaching Captain Morrison how to understand it." The implications rippled through the room. If the drake was intelligent, truly aware and thinking, then everything changed. It wasn't a captured animal. It was a freed prisoner. It wasn't a threat to manage. It was a being with rights. "Even if we accept it's intelligent," said a government official, "that doesn't change the security concern. It's still dangerous." "One drake destroyed an entire facility and killed dozens of soldiers." "Soldiers who had been torturing it for 2 centuries, Commander Grant said sharply. "I think we can agree that was justified self-defense." The debate continued for another hour. Jake stood at attention, answering question after question. His team was called in too, and Kate, Danny, and the others confirmed every detail of his report. Finally, as evening turned to night, Admiral Henderson called for a vote. "The question is simple," the Admiral said. "Do we allow Captain Morrison to continue interacting with the drake under controlled conditions, or do we remove the creature from Terran space and end this experiment before it goes wrong?" The vote was closer than Jake liked, but the council decided to allow a 30-day trial. Jake could continue working with the drake, but under strict rules and heavy supervision. If the drake showed any signs of aggression toward humans, or if communication failed, it would be relocated immediately. Jake accepted the terms without hesitation. Over the following weeks, Jake spent every available moment with the drake. He started calling it Ember, though he kept the name to himself at first. The drake was patient, far more patient than expected. They developed a system of communication using symbols drawn in dirt, then progressing to colored stones arranged in patterns. It was slow work, frustrating at times, but progress was clear. Ember could convey basic ideas like hunger, pain, safety, danger. More surprisingly, the drake began expressing abstract concepts like memory, time, and something that might have been gratitude or affection. Jake's team visited regularly, though they kept a respectful distance. It was Kate who first noticed the change in Jake. "You're different around it," she observed one evening. They watched Jake and Ember engaged in another communication session. The drake would create a pattern, Jake would study it and respond, and the process would repeat. "What do you mean?" Danny asked. "Look at him. He's completely focused. I've served with the captain for 5 years, and I've never seen him this centered. It's like he found something he didn't know he was looking for." She was right. There was something about the connection with Ember that felt significant. It was as if in freeing the drake, Jake had also freed something in himself. Dr. Webb observed the sessions with fascination, taking notes and running scans of both Jake and Ember. What he found amazed him. "There's synchronization," he told Jake one evening, showing him data. "When you're communicating with Ember, your brainwave patterns begin to mirror each other. Not perfectly, but enough to suggest you're forming a genuine connection, some kind of bond." "Is that possible?" Jake asked, studying the graphs. "It shouldn't be," Dr. Webb admitted. Your brain structures are completely different, but drakes are known to have psychic abilities. The Krillians were harvesting psychic energy from Ember for centuries. It's possible the drake is creating a bridge between your minds." The implications were huge, but Jake didn't have time to process them fully. On day 23 of the trial period, everything changed. It started with Ember becoming upset, pacing and making low distress calls. Jake rushed to the site and found the drake creating urgent patterns in the dirt. The symbols were complex, more intricate than anything Ember had tried before. Jake knelt in the dirt, studying the symbols Ember had drawn. His heart raced as understanding finally came. The patterns showed ships, many ships, arranged in attack formation. They were coming here, to this planet, and they weren't friendly. "Commander Grant," Jake shouted into his radio, "we have a problem, a big one. Ember is saying the Krillians are coming, not a small force, a full battle fleet, and they're coming for revenge." The security team looked at each other nervously. Commander Grant's voice came through the radio, skeptical but cautious. How could the drake possibly know that? Jake looked at Ember, at those ancient, intelligent eyes, and suddenly understood. The psychic link. The Krillians were connected to Ember for 200 years. Ember can still sense them, can feel them approaching. It's trying to warn us. How long do we have? Jake turned back to Ember's symbols, counting the stone arrangements. His heart sank. Less than 24 hours. And Commander, there's more. Ember says they're bringing a weapon designed to kill drakes, something from the old wars. There was silence on the radio for a long moment. When Commander Grant spoke again, her voice was hard. "Then we'd better prepare, because if the Krillians want Ember back, they're going to have to go through us first." Jake looked at the drake, at the creature he'd freed and come to respect, maybe even care for. Not just us. Ember fought for freedom once. It deserves the chance to defend it. In the containment zone, Ember raised its head and roared. The sound carried across the base like a declaration of war. The bond between human and drake had been forged in compassion. Now it would be tested in fire and blood. The Krillian battle fleet appeared at the edge of the star system like a swarm of angry insects. 16 warships, heavily armed and carrying hundreds of fighters. It was the largest Krillian force the Terran Defense Corps had seen in 5 years, and it was all focused on one goal: recapturing Ember. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the ship Valiant, watching the enemy vessels on the display. Commander Grant was in charge of the defense fleet, which had only 7 ships. The numbers weren't good, and everyone knew it. "They're calling us," reported Lieutenant Sam Parker. "Should I put it through?" Commander Grant nodded. On screen. The view screen showed a Krillian commander, its scales mottled green-gray, its eyes cold and calculating. When it spoke, the computer translated its harsh voice. "I am Commander Vexcal of the Krillian Imperial Navy. You are holding stolen property of the Empire. Surrender the Drake immediately, and we might not destroy your fleet." "The Drake isn't property," Commander Grant replied steadily. "It's a sentient being under Terran protection. Turn your fleet around, Commander, or we will consider this an act of war." Vexcal's mouth opened in what might have been a laugh. "You think you can threaten the Krillian Empire with 7 ships? That Drake belonged to my family for 3 generations. It is our most valuable asset. We will reclaim it, with or without your cooperation." "Then I guess it's without," Grant said, and nodded to cut the transmission. The Krillian fleet began advancing. The Terran ships moved to meet them, but Jake's attention wasn't on the space battle about to start. His focus was on the planet below, where Ember waited in the containment zone, surrounded by security and protected by shield generators. "Captain Morrison," Commander Grant said, pulling his attention back. "I need you on the ground. If the Krillians break through, Ember is going to need someone it trusts." Jake nodded and headed for the shuttle bay. As he left, The first weapons fire lit up the view screen. Energy beams and projectiles filled the space between the fleets. The trip to the surface was tense. The shuttle shook from near misses as Krillian fighters tried to intercept them. Jake's pilot, a young woman named Amy Carson, navigated through the chaos with skill. They touched down at the base just as the orbital battle grew more intense. Jake ran to the containment zone. Ember was waiting, the Drake's body tense and ready for action. When it saw Jake, it made that familiar rumbling sound, but there was an edge to it now, something primal and dangerous. Using their symbol system, Jake tried to communicate. Stay here, safe, protected. But Ember's response was strong, almost angry. The Drake used its claw to draw rapid symbols that Jake had learned meant fight, sky, and free. I know you want to fight, Jake said aloud, knowing Ember couldn't understand the words, but hoping the tone would help. But you're safer here. The shield will protect you. Ember's eyes narrowed. For the first time since their bond formed, Jake saw something like disappointment in the Drake's expression. The creature turned away, curling its body defensively, wings folded tight. The message was clear. If Jake wouldn't let it fight, it would wait, but it wasn't happy. Jake spent the next 2 hours monitoring the battle from a mobile command post. The news wasn't good. The Terran fleet was holding on, but barely. The Krillians seemed to have endless fighters and support craft. Worse, long-range sensors had detected something else. A massive ship, larger than any of the others, hung back at the edge of the system. It was charging some kind of weapon, but what exactly remained unclear. Captain Morrison, Dr. Webb's voice came through, urgent and afraid. I've been analyzing the energy readings from that large ship. I think I know what it is. It's an extinction ship. The Krillians used them during their war against the Drakes 200 years ago. It's equipped with a weapon that targets Drake biology exclusively. Jake's blood ran cold. How effective is it? According to records, one shot can kill a Drake regardless of shields or armor. It disrupts the unique structures in their neural pathways. Death is instant. Dr. Webb paused. Captain, if they fire that weapon at Ember's location, there's nothing we can do to stop it. Jake looked back at the containment zone, at the shield generators that had seemed so solid. They would be useless against a weapon designed specifically to kill Drakes. Ember was essentially defenseless. He was about to respond when his radio crackled again. Commander Grant's voice was strained. All ground personnel, be advised. The Krillians are landing troops at multiple sites around the base. Prepare for ground assault. The battle had come to them. The Krillian ground forces were professional and efficient, pushing toward the containment zone with clear purpose. Terran troops fought back hard, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Jake coordinated with Kate Fletcher, who was leading a defensive squad, trying to buy time and hold the line. But he knew it was pointless. The Krillians weren't trying to capture the whole base. They were driving toward one specific target, toward Ember. Inside the containment zone, the Drake had risen to its feet, sensing the approaching danger. Its head turned toward Jake, and their eyes met. In that moment, the bond between them pulsed with intensity. Jake felt something he'd never experienced before. Not words exactly, but understanding flowing directly from Ember's mind to his. The Drake wasn't afraid. It was ready. Ready to fight, ready to defend itself, ready to finally take revenge on the species that had enslaved it. All it needed was for Jake to lower the containment field. Jake's hand hovered over the control panel. Part of him screamed that this was wrong, that unleashing Ember into combat was dangerous and reckless. But another part, the part connected to the Drake through their bond, understood the truth. Ember had earned the right to fight for its own freedom. Forgive me if this goes wrong, Jake whispered, and shut down the containment field. Ember exploded into motion with a roar that shook the ground itself. The Drake launched into the air, wings beating with tremendous force. For a moment, it hung above the base like an ancient god of war. Then it dove toward the advancing Krillian forces with fury in its eyes. The effect was immediate and devastating. Ember tore through their lines like a hurricane, all claws and fire and rage. Soldiers scattered, vehicles exploded, and the organized assault fell into chaos. Jake watched from his position, part amazed and part horrified by the sheer destructive power of the creature he'd freed. But Ember wasn't random in its attacks. Jake noticed the Drake's strikes avoided Terran positions, carefully targeting only Krillian forces. Even in battle fury, Ember remembered who its allies were. The tide of the ground battle turned in minutes. The Krillian troops, faced with a Vorathian Drake in full rage, broke and fled toward their landing craft. Ember pursued, relentless and devastating, until the last of them had retreated or been destroyed. In orbit, Commander Grant saw her chance. With the Krillian forces in disorder, she ordered a focused assault on their heavier ships. 2 Krillian destroyers were disabled. A third was forced to retreat. For a moment, it looked like the Terrans might actually win. Then the extinction ship began to move forward, its massive weapon systems glowing with threatening light. "All ships, focus fire on that extinction ship," Grant ordered. But even as her fleet unleashed everything they had, she knew it wouldn't be enough. The ship's shields absorbed the punishment, barely flickering. On the ground, Jake saw the danger. He could feel Ember's awareness through their bond, the Drake's sudden spike of primal fear as it recognized the threat. This was the weapon that had destroyed its species, that had hunted its kind to near extinction. Ember knew what that ship could do. "Get clear!" Jake shouted at the Drake, knowing it probably couldn't understand but needing to try. "Get away from here!" But Ember didn't flee. Instead, the Drake did something that shocked everyone. It turned and flew directly toward Jake, landing beside him with earth-shaking force. Then, with infinite gentleness, it lowered its head and bumped Jake's chest, almost knocking him over. Through their bond, Jake felt what Ember was trying to say, and his heart broke. The Drake was saying goodbye. "No," Jake said, grabbing onto one of Ember's horns. "No, you don't get to sacrifice yourself. Not after everything." "We'll find another way." But Ember was determined. The Drake pulled away gently but firmly, then turned and launched back into the sky. It was flying not away from the extinction ship, but toward it. The Drake was going to try to destroy the weapon before it could fire, even if it meant certain death. "Ember, stop!" Jake screamed, but the Drake was already too far to hear, and then something happened that no one expected. As Ember climbed toward the extinction ship, new signatures appeared on everyone's sensors. Not one Drake, but 3, emerging from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They were smaller than Ember, younger perhaps, but unmistakably Vorathian Drakes. "Where did those come from?" Commander Grant demanded from the bridge of the Valiant. Dr. Webb's voice came through, filled with wonder. "The psychic link. Ember's been broadcasting through it ever since the battle started. It was calling for help, and somehow, impossibly, other Drakes heard and answered." The 3 new Drakes didn't hesitate. They dove toward the extinction ship with the same courage Ember had shown. Together, the 4 Drakes attacked the massive vessel. It was like watching ancient myths come to life, dragons assaulting a mechanical giant, claws and fire against steel and energy weapons. Jake watched, unable to do anything but hope. The extinction ship's weapon was fully charged now, the barrel beginning to track Ember's position. In seconds, it would fire, and everything they'd fought for would be lost. But then one of the younger Drakes did something desperate and brave. It flew directly into the weapon's barrel just as it fired, its body blocking the discharge. The Drake died instantly, its sacrifice buying precious seconds. Ember and the 2 remaining Drakes pressed their attack with renewed fury. Ember's claws found a critical point in the ship's hull, tearing through armor that was never designed to withstand a Drake's full strength. The other 2 focused their fire on the weapon system itself. their plasma breath melting through defensive plating. For a moment, it looked like it might work. Then the extinction ship's captain made a final, desperate decision. Unable to use the Drake-killing weapon, he activated the ship's self-destruct sequence. "All ships, get clear," Grant ordered, recognizing what was about to happen. "That thing's going to take out everything nearby." The explosion, when it came, was blinding. A miniature star bloomed in space above the planet, consuming the extinction ship, 3 Krillian cruisers that had been too close, and everything else in its immediate area. The shockwave rolled outward, battering the remaining ships and lighting up the planet's upper atmosphere. When the light finally faded, Jake searched the sky desperately, trying to find any sign of Ember or the other Drakes. For long, painful moments, there was nothing. Then a single figure emerged from the fading debris, wings beating slowly, body clearly injured but alive. Ember had survived. But of the 2 younger Drakes who had fought alongside it, there was no sign. They, like their brave sibling, had given their lives to stop the extinction ship. The Krillian fleet, having lost their flagship and their commander, retreated. The Battle of Epsilon 7 was over. Won at terrible cost. Ember landed heavily near Jake's position, its scales burned and cracked in places, blood seeping from dozens of wounds. The Drake collapsed, its breathing labored. Jake ran to it without hesitation. "Medical team!" he shouted into his radio. "We need help immediately!" As Dr. Webb and his team rushed to treat the injured Drake, Jake knelt beside Ember's head. The Drake's eyes opened, focusing on him with what looked like satisfaction. Through their bond, Jake felt the message clearly now. Free. Alive. Home. "Yeah," Jake said softly, his hand resting on the Drake's scarred scales. "You're home. And you're safe. I promise." But even as he said it, even as Ember's eyes closed in exhausted relief, Jake felt something else through their connection. A warning. Faint, but present. The Krillians would not forget. They would not forgive. And they would return. 6 months after the Battle of Epsilon 7, the Terran Defense Corps headquarters had changed dramatically. The observation deck where Captain Jake Morrison now stood offered a view of the specially built sanctuary that had become home to 17 Drakes, including Ember. 17. It was hard to believe that number, considering most of the galaxy had thought the species extinct just half a year ago. But Ember's psychic call during the battle had resonated across space in ways no one fully understood. Slowly, carefully, other Drakes had emerged from hiding. Each carried scars, both physical and mental, from the long war the Krillians had waged against their kind. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Dr. Webb said, joining Jake at the window. Below them, several Drakes were engaged in what looked like a training exercise, their movements coordinated and purposeful. "I never thought I'd see this," Jake admitted. "When I freed Ember, I just wanted to help one creature in pain. I didn't imagine it would lead to all this." After the battle, the Terran government had made a controversial decision. They would offer official sanctuary to any Vorathian Drake who sought it. They would recognize Drakes as a sentient species with full rights under Terran law. The decision had sparked diplomatic problems with the Krillian Empire and several other species, but humanity had stood firm. More than that, Jake's unique bond with Ember had become the template for a new kind of alliance. Under Dr. Webb's guidance, a program had been established to carefully pair willing humans with willing Drakes. It was voluntary on both sides and not always successful, but when it worked, the results were extraordinary. "How many bonded pairs do we have now?" Jake asked. 12 confirmed with 3 more in the early stages, Dr. Webb replied. "Kate Fletcher and the Drake she calls Ruby are showing remarkable progress. Their bond formed faster than any except yours and Ember's." Jake wasn't surprised. Kate had always been understanding and caring, traits that seemed important for forming Drake bonds. He'd watched with pride as his former second-in-command had become one of the program's success stories. A signal from Jake's radio interrupted his thoughts. It was Admiral Grant, promoted after her performance during the battle. "Morrison, we need you in the war room. We've received intelligence from one of our agents in Krillian space. It's urgent." Jake arrived at the war room to find it packed with military leaders, government officials, and several of the bonded Drake human pairs, including Kate and Ruby. The large Drake was curled in a specially designed space, her golden eyes alert and focused on the displays. Admiral Grant activated the central display, showing a star map of Krillian space. A single point deep within enemy territory pulsed red. 3 days ago, our agent managed to get into a classified Krillian research facility. What they found is disturbing. The image shifted to show surveillance footage of a massive underground complex. Inside, hundreds of creatures were held in containment fields, their forms writhing in obvious pain. Jake's stomach turned as he recognized what he was seeing. More Varathian drakes, dozens of them, all enslaved as Ember had been. "They've been collecting them for years," Grant continued. "Every drake they could find, captured and imprisoned. They're using them as living batteries, draining their psychic energy to power weapons research. According to our agent, they're close to completing a new generation of weapons designed to kill humans, weapons powered by tortured drakes." The room erupted in angry voices, but Jake barely heard them. His attention was fixed on the display, on those imprisoned drakes. He felt Ember's presence through their bond, the drake having sensed his distress from across the base. The rage and sorrow that flooded through their connection was overwhelming. "There's more," Grant said, silencing the room. "Our agent was discovered before they could escape. They're being held in the same facility. We have 72 hours before their identity is fully revealed, after which they'll be killed." "Then we go in and get them out," Jake said immediately. "We rescue our agent and free those drakes." "It's not that simple," argued General Barry Hudson. "That facility is in the heart of Krillian space, surrounded by their home fleet. It would take weeks to organize a proper military operation, and we don't have that kind of time." "Then we don't use a proper military operation," Kate said, standing up. Ruby rose beside her, the drake's posture making it clear they were united. "We go in fast and quiet, a small team of bonded pairs, supported by special forces. Get in, free the prisoners, and get out before the Krillians can respond." "That's suicide," Hudson said sharply. "Even with drakes, you're talking about going into the most heavily defended region of enemy space." "It's suicide to leave them there," Jake countered. "Those drakes are being tortured to build weapons that will be used against us, and our agent risked everything to bring us this information. We don't abandon our people." The debate continued for another hour, but in the end, the decision was made. A rescue operation would be launched, led by Jake and Ember, with Kate and Ruby as second-in-command. They would have 5 other bonded pairs, along with 2 squads of Special Forces soldiers. It was a small force for such an ambitious goal, but speed and stealth were more important than numbers. The preparation time was intense. Jake spent every available moment with Ember, refining their communication and practicing coordinated movements. The bond between them had grown stronger over the months. They could sometimes sense each other's intentions before they were acted upon. This connection would be crucial to the mission's success. The night before departure, Jake found himself unable to sleep. He made his way to the sanctuary where Ember waited. The drake's massive form was lit by moonlight, scales shimmering like polished gems. "Can't sleep either?" Jake asked, settling against Ember's side. The drake made that familiar rumbling sound, the one Jake had learned meant comfort and care. Through their bond, Jake felt Ember's thoughts, clearer than ever before. Not words, but concepts and emotions. Worry for the imprisoned drakes, determination to free them, and something else. Gratitude. After all this time, Ember was still grateful for that moment when Jake had chosen to break its chains. "We're going to get them out," Jake promised, his hand resting on the drake's scarred scales. "All of them. I don't care what it takes." Ember's response was a wave of fierce agreement, followed by something that might have been a question. "And if they can't escape? If freeing them means staying behind?" Jake understood what the drake was really asking. If it came down to a choice between completing the mission and surviving it, what would they do? "We do what's right," Jake said finally, "whatever the cost." The mission launched before dawn. A fleet of stealth-capable ships carried the rescue team deep into Krillian space. The journey took 3 days, during which Jake and his team ran countless practice runs and refined their approach. They would have one chance at this, one opportunity to strike before the Krillians realized what was happening. The facility was located on a barren moon, hidden beneath layers of rock and shielding. The plan was simple in concept, but brutally difficult in execution. The bonded pairs would create a diversion at the facility's main entrance, while the Special Forces teams infiltrated from below located the agent and the imprisoned drakes, and prepared them for evacuation. As they approached the target, Jake felt Ember's anticipation building. The drake was coiled and ready, every muscle taut with barely contained energy. Around them, the other drake-human pairs prepared in their own ways. Kate and Ruby were going over tactical displays one last time. A young pilot named Chris Tyler checked his equipment while his drake partner, a silver-scaled female they called Storm, watched with sharp intelligence. 5 minutes to drop," the pilot announced. Jake closed his eyes and reached through the bond, feeling not just Ember's presence, but something more. The other drakes, all of them connected through some deeper psychic network that humans could only barely sense. They were afraid, but they were also ready to fight for their imprisoned kin, ready to show the Krillians that Vorathian drakes would never be slaves again. The assault began with fire and thunder. Ember and the other drakes hit the facility's main entrance like a force of nature, their combined plasma breath reducing defensive positions to molten metal. Krillian soldiers poured out to meet them, and the battle was joined. But this time was different from Epsilon 7. This time, the drakes weren't fighting alone or in desperate chaos. They fought as coordinated units, each bonded pair working in perfect harmony. Jake directed Ember's attacks while maintaining communication with the rest of the team, and the drake responded to his guidance with absolute trust. Below ground, the Special Forces teams breached the facility's lower levels and fought their way toward the holding cells. The imprisoned drakes sensed freedom approaching and added their psychic voices to the battle, a chorus of rage and hope that resonated through every bonded pair. "We've found them," came the report from Sergeant Luis Martinez, leading the infiltration team. "But Captain, you need to see this. It's worse than we thought." When Jake saw the footage from Martinez's helmet camera, his heart sank. The Krillians hadn't just imprisoned these drakes, they'd done something terrible to them. Each one was hooked up to nightmarish machinery that pulsed with stolen psychic energy. Some of the drakes were barely conscious, their bodies wasted from years of torture. Others thrashed weakly against their bonds, too damaged to even recognize that rescue had arrived. And in the center of it all, in the largest containment cell, was a drake that made even Ember look small. It was ancient, its scales faded with age, its eyes clouded and dim. But when the containment field dropped, when freedom finally came after who knew how many centuries of captivity, that ancient drake raised its head and roared with a voice that shook the entire facility. Jake felt Ember's shock through their bond, followed by recognition. This wasn't just any drake. This was an elder, one of the first generation, possibly one of the oldest living beings in the galaxy. The Krillians had kept it alive and suffering for longer than human civilization had existed. "Get them all out," Jake ordered. "I don't care if you have to carry them. Nobody gets left behind." The evacuation was chaos. Some of the freed drakes could fly on their own, immediately taking to the air and joining the battle above. Others needed help, soldiers and bonded humans guiding them to the extraction ships. The ancient elder drake was the last to leave, and as it passed Jake on its way to freedom, it paused. The connection that formed in that moment wasn't like the bond Jake shared with Ember. It was something older, deeper, more primal. Images flooded Jake's mind. Memories of a time when Varathian drakes soared freely through the skies of 100 worlds before the Krillians had come with their chains. The Elder was sharing its history, passing on the knowledge of what had been lost. And then it shared something else. A warning. The Krillians were preparing something terrible, a final solution to what they called the Drake problem. War was coming, not just small fights and border conflicts, but total war. Extinction or freedom. There would be no middle ground. The Elder's ancient eyes met Jake's, and through the connection, Jake felt the question. Will you stand with us? Will your kind fight beside ours when that day comes? Yes, Jake said aloud, not caring who heard. We will stand with you. To the end, whatever that brings. The ancient drake's response was approval, and something that might have been hope. Then it spread its massive wings and took to the sky, its roar echoing across the moon's barren surface. The extraction went better than they had any right to expect. All the freed drakes made it to the ships, along with the rescued agent. There were casualties, soldiers who had given their lives to free beings they'd never met. Jake made sure their names were recorded and honored. They had died for something that mattered, for the principle that no thinking being deserved to live in chains. As the rescue fleet jumped back to Terran space, Jake stood with Ember in the cargo bay that had been converted to a temporary drake sanctuary. Around them, dozens of freed drakes huddled together, many still weak and injured, but all unmistakably, gloriously free. Kate approached, Ruby at her side. "The Elder wants to speak with you," she said. "Well, not speak exactly, but you know what I mean." Jake found the ancient drake resting in a corner, its breathing labored but steady. When he approached, the Elder opened one clouded eye and reached out through that strange, deep connection once more. What came through wasn't words or even clear images, but understanding. The Elder was dying, its body too damaged by centuries of captivity to survive much longer. But it wasn't afraid. It had lived to see its people freed, had lived to see a new alliance between drakes and humans. That was enough. The Elder had one final gift to share. Knowledge. The locations of other hidden drake sanctuaries scattered across the galaxy. Places where small populations of drakes still survived, hiding from Krillian hunters. And more importantly, the location of something the Elder called the Gathering Place, a world where drakes had once come together in peace, before the wars had scattered them. "Can you show me?" Jake asked. "Can you share the coordinates?" The Elder's response was to flood Jake's mind with star maps and navigation data. But mixed with the practical information was something else. Hope. The Elder believed that if drakes and humans truly stood together, they could reclaim what had been lost. They could rebuild. They could thrive. 2 days later, the Elder Drake passed away peacefully, surrounded by its kin and by the humans who had freed it. Jake and Ember stood vigil as the ancient creature took its last breath. Through their bond, Jake felt Ember's grief mixed with determination. The Krillians would pay for what they'd done, not through mindless revenge, but through the simple act of thriving, of proving that drakes could not be destroyed, could not be enslaved, would not vanish into extinction. Admiral Grant called another council meeting a week after the rescue mission. The room was crowded with representatives from several species who had taken interest in the growing human-drake alliance. The display showed the locations the Elder had shared, each one marked as a potential sanctuary or hiding place for drake populations. "This changes everything," Grant said. "If even half of these locations contain surviving drakes, we're looking at a population in the hundreds, possibly thousands. The Varathian species isn't on the brink of extinction. It's on the brink of coming back. Which means the Krillians will throw everything they have at stopping it," General Hudson said grimly. "They've built their empire on drake slavery. If the drakes are freed and unified, it threatens their entire power structure." "Let them try," Kate said, and Ruby growled in agreement. "We'll be ready." Jake stood, and the room quieted. "The Elder showed me something before it died. Not just locations, but a vision of what the galaxy could be if drakes and humans worked together. We're stronger together than we ever could be apart. The Krillians enslaved drakes because they feared them. We've chosen to stand beside them as equals, as friends. That's the difference. That's what will win this war." He looked around the room, at the humans and drakes gathered together. At the bond they'd forged through compassion and courage and respect. The Krillians wanted to make drakes into weapons. Instead, they created something they never expected: allies, partners, family. Ember moved forward to stand beside Jake, the drake's massive head nearly level with his own. Through their bond, Jake felt the drake's complete agreement, and more than that, a sense of deep gratitude. Ember had been freed from chains, yes, but more importantly, it had been given something it thought was lost forever: a future. "The war is coming," Jake continued. "The Krillians won't stop until they've destroyed every free drake in the galaxy. But this time they won't be fighting a scattered, hunted species. They'll be fighting an alliance. And they'll learn what happens when you underestimate the power of freedom." The decision was made to reach out to the hidden drake populations, to offer sanctuary and alliance. Teams would be sent to investigate each location, always led by bonded pairs who could communicate peaceful intentions. It would be dangerous work, as many drakes had been hiding for so long they might not trust any outsiders. But it was necessary work. The gathering place that the Elder had spoken of became the focus of their plans. A world that could be transformed into a true sanctuary. A place where drakes could live freely without fear of hunters or slavers. 6 months later, Jake stood on that world for the first time. It was beautiful in a harsh way, with crystal mountains that caught the light and cast rainbow patterns across the sky. The ruins of ancient drake settlements dotted the landscape, evidence of a civilization that had thrived here before the Krillians came. Ember stood beside him, and around them, dozens of other drakes explored their ancestral home. Some were freed slaves, carrying the scars of their captivity. Others were from hidden populations, seeing this place for the first time, but feeling its significance through their species' shared memory. Kate and Ruby landed nearby, returning from a scouting mission. "The northern valley would be perfect for a main settlement," Kate reported. "Plenty of water, good sight lines, and enough space for hundreds of drakes, maybe thousands eventually." "And the defense systems?" Jake asked. "Chris and Storm found the perfect location for our command center. Natural cave system with excellent sensor coverage of the entire planet. If the Krillians want to attack this place, they'll see us coming from far away." Jake nodded, satisfied. The gathering place wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a statement, a declaration that Varathian drakes would no longer hide, no longer live in fear of extinction. They would stand in the light, defended by themselves and by their human allies. Dr. Webb joined them, his datapad showing the latest population estimates. "We've made contact with 12 hidden drake populations so far. Confirmed sightings of at least 300 individuals, with more reports coming in every day. Jake, we might be looking at over 1,000 surviving drakes. The species is going to survive." "More than survive," Jake said, watching Ember interact with a group of younger drakes, teaching them the symbol language that the drake had developed with Jake. "They're going to thrive." That night, as the planet's 3 moons rose over the crystal mountains, The drakes of the gathering place did something that hadn't been done in over 200 years. They sang. It wasn't singing in the human sense, but a complex harmony of psychic resonance and physical sound that carried across the entire world. Every drake joined in. From the youngest to the scarred veterans of slavery, their voices blending into something that spoke of loss and grief, but also of hope and determination and unbreakable spirit. Jake felt it through his bond with Ember, felt the weight of 2 centuries of suffering lifting, felt the collective consciousness of an entire species remembering what it meant to be free. Tears streamed down his face. And he wasn't alone. Every human on the planet stood frozen, many weeping openly at the sheer emotional power of what they were experiencing. When the song finally ended, as the last notes faded into the night air, Jake looked up at Ember and saw his drake partner watching him with those ancient, intelligent eyes. Through their bond came a message, clearer than any they'd shared before. Thank you. For freedom. For hope. For choosing to see past fear to understanding. Thank you for being our ally, our friend, our family. Jake reached up and placed his hand on Ember's snout, feeling the warmth of the drake's scales, the steady rhythm of breath and heartbeat. Always, he said, through whatever comes, we stand together. And high above them, in the cold darkness of space, Krillian warships gathered. The Empire had learned of the gathering place, had discovered what the humans and drakes were building. They would come with fire and fury, with weapons designed to kill and chains meant to enslave, but they would find something they didn't expect. They would find not victims, but warriors. Not slaves, but free beings willing to fight and die for that freedom. They would find humans and drakes standing together, bound not by chains, but by choice, by respect, by bonds that could not be broken. The war for drake freedom was about to enter its final phase. And on a world of crystal mountains under 3 moons, an alliance forged in compassion and sealed in blood prepared to show the galaxy what true strength looked like. Captain Jake Morrison, the man who had freed a slave and changed the fate of 2 species, stood ready. Ember, the drake who had survived 2 centuries of captivity and emerged unbroken, stood ready. And all around them, hundreds of drakes and humans stood ready, united in purpose and firm in resolve. The Krillians had started this war 200 years ago, when they first decided that Varathian drakes were nothing more than resources to be used. Now, finally, that war was going to end, not with the extinction the Krillians had sought, but with the liberation they had feared. Freedom had come to the drakes, and it had come with fire, with wings, and with the unbreakable bond between a human warrior and an alien dragon, who had both learned that true strength comes not from control, but from standing together. The gathering place sang into the night, and its song carried a message to every drake still hiding in the darkness. Still fearing the chains, come home, you are not alone, we are free, and we will never be slaves again.